It all overlaps. I don't think you necessarily have to be an outright white supremacist who wants an ethno-state to be palling around with these people, to be adjacent to them. But you are helping the cross-pollination of this pipeline. There's no question about that. Each one of these people, as we go further down the rabbit hole, eventually it connects itself all the way to the mainstream. I mean, Gavin McInnes was on the Joe Rogan podcast, lest we forget. And on that Joe Rogan podcast, Joe Rogan was normalizing some of the most fucked up shit he says. So it does have consequences, whether it's starting out in these comedy scenes and then ballooning itself into the real world. Like, the shit is scary as fuck. This is also very troubling. I don't know if anyone has heard this, but the comedy industry has a big alt-right problem. Not right-wing problem, alt-right. And this story, which was in the New Republic, I just found it yesterday. In the dark recesses of the internet lurks a man who goes by toxic cis white male fat. He makes his home on onaforums.net, a community named after the shock jock duo Opie and Anthony, a safe space to say what cannot be said offline. He's posted in threads like N-word hate thread number 1, the K-word hate thread, the Juno comes out as a T-slur, an official post-election voter fraud thread where he called Joe Biden a pedophile R-slur who's about to die in the Oval Office. Elsewhere, he's derided that the COVID-19 vaccine, which he calls G-slur juice. All the slurs are coming out. You get your pick, all right? It's the rainbow of slurs today. The C-word, I can't even say the rest of this. Last year, he revealed his Twitter account, and I'm trying to say this in the most professional broadcast voice that I can, okay? The username matches the commenter on Thought Catalog, which toxic cis white male fat has said he trolled after it retracted a transphobic essay by the Proud Boys founder Gavin McInnes. His contributions were more of the same. Under a 2015 post titled "When You Love the Chase," he once commented, "There is not a more despicable human on the earth than a fat white N-word." I'm just gonna stop reading his quotes. We're gonna start there. The internet can sometimes seem like one big rabbit hole, and if you make it down to the bottom, waiting for you is a person. At the bottom of mine was toxic cis white male fat. I spent 5 years writing about the comedy industry, the last 3 or so covering inequality and extremism within it. This work has periodically brought me in contact with some of the leading lights in the scene's transgressive edge, the place where popular mainstream comedy bleeds into this kind of right-wing politics that animated the Capitol riot last month. It's a place hostile to prying eyes, and the blowback can be furious. I've been harassed and trolled on social media. I've been doxxed, as have members of my family, and eventually I found my way to a message board where toxic cis white male fat, who I have reason to believe, though I cannot definitely prove, is a person at the heart of the New York City club comedy scene, and others participating in the Gamergate-style campaign that is conducted against me. What is really weird is that I heard the same thing from We're in Hell, who is a YouTuber who also works heavily in the comedy scene in Toronto, as have I from Thought Slime. You might know him as a YouTuber as well, who also works in the comedy scene on that side of Canada. And both of them have said that there's just an enormous right-wing problem, not alt-right, but right-wing problem in Canadian comedy right now. One of the reasons being is that comedy clubs are essentially closed, effectively closed, because of the whole COVID thing. The ones that have reopened, or when they were reopening, were, staggering seats, so they weren't getting as many people in there. So there's been an underground comedy scene for all the people who are basically either anti-maskers, anti-lockdown, all the way up to anti-vaxxers. They're now congregating in these underground comedy scenes and just letting like all the racism fly. Like, that's being considered what is funny in these circles. This online forum, just one node off the constellation of similar forums, subreddits, and Discord groups, is now an outlier in the industry. But before I take you down my particular rabbit hole, it's worth establishing that in many ways in which the world of comedy and the racist right-wing overlap and reinforce each other. The recent comedy boom is popularly understood as an era in which there are new forms of media like podcasts, streaming video, and they've created massive audiences for comedy, which in turn created massive new revenue streams for comedians. At the same time, the artificial intimacy of these platforms allow fans to feel a level of connection with their favorite performers and with each other that converge on the cultish, the parasocial thing. It was also an era of wall-off subcultures, like onaforums.net, which could transform into real violent political factions, especially at a time when comedy was increasingly pitted against the forces of political correctness. The very forces that also fueled the grievances of Donald Trump supporters and the revanchist right. Revanchist. That's a new word to me, revanchist. Revanchism. It's a political manifestation of the will to reverse territorial losses incurred by a country, often following a war or social movement. Cool. Revanchism. Revanchist. Am I the only one who just learned that word? Or is everyone here? I originally read it as revengist, and I was like, that's not a word. But I know Chad is going to be like, what lands? Philistine. Doesn't even understand what words are. I know big words. I know different words. If the far right's origin in comedy are ill appreciated, they were never particularly secret. By his own account, Gavin McInnes created the Proud Boys on Compound Media, a subscriber-based digital network where he hosted a talk show from 2015 to 2017, originally called the Anthony Cumia Network. Compound Media was created in 2014 by Cumia, the Anthony half of Opie and Anthony, after his firing from SiriusXM over a series of racist tweets. The Gavin McInnes show, like many other programs of the self-styled free speech network, was not shy about its politics. Over the show's 407 episodes, McInnes spoke glowingly of right-wing violence, proudly declared himself a racist, and regularly used the N-word, amongst other slurs. When a caller questioned his interracial marriage in 2016, McInnes responded that he had children with a woman of color because he's cleaning up the races. The pretense of irony hung over everything he said, but the pretense of it is all it ever was. Compound Media, where he was telling jokes, gave way to sayings that you meant jokingly. Like, this is just so wild that people don't know this about Gavin McInnes. They're always like, well, it was just jokes for the lulz, bro. You know, Gavin McInnes, he's a good old boy. He's just a good old boy. Telling jokes, fighting for free speech. He's in an interracial marriage. You know that, even though he jokes about his interracial marriage as being something about cleansing the races. But anyways, when McInnes founded the Proud Boys in 2016, he used the Gavin McInnes Show as a recruitment tool. In his monologue and call-in segments, he laid out the organizational principles for customs. Chief among them was his ideology in Western chauvinism, a belief in the superiority of Western civilization and the white people supposedly responsible for it. White males are a big part of what made the West great, he told a caller with questions about joining. The black contingent of the Proud Boys is pro-white male, the same as if you were an expat living in Japan, you'd be pro-Japanese and take your shoes off, as in know your place. Despite his concerns that openly Nazi elements of the far right were bad for his brand, McInnes didn't hesitate to associate with them. His guests were a who's who of contemporary far right, Emilio Yiannopoulos, Richard Spencer, Unite the Right rally organizer Jason Kessler, the crying Nazi Christopher Cantwell, Mike Cernovich, Sal Cipolla, Faith Goldie, Roosh Voosh, who's the pickup artist some of you may know, Roosh V, and even a former KKK leader, David Duke. The Gavin McInnes Show was more than a white power hour, however. In the years before the show, on shows like Compound Media, McInnes tried his hand at live comedy, performing in the New York venues like the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater and the Creek in the Cave. He recorded a podcast, Free Speech, at the club at Stand Up in New York in 2016. McInnes said he was banned from the club, from the stand, after he exposed himself on stage. He later recalled the manager telling him, "I have to turn my back on you now." I guess he's been doing that shoving dildos up his ass routine for a while now. It's just, at some point it's going to land. He used his platform on Compound Media to mingle with the revolving door of respected ever mainstream comics, people like Big Jake Okerson, Tim Dillon, Justy Dodge, Mike Lawrence, Larry the Cable Guy, Joe Matarese, Tom Shalhoub, Dave Dill, more names, none of whom were deterred by McInnes' friendliness with white supremacists. Some stopped for a one-off appearance, others were repeats like Gomez and Smith, who hosted their own Compound Media show, Legion of Skanks. The reason I love Gavin is because he says the N-word and the F-slur so much that it's not even a big deal. When you come to watch the Legion of Skanks show, you should be hearing racist, sexist, offensive shit. If you're upset about that, don't watch the show. Well, I mean, that's pretty... In retrospect, the Gavin McInnes Show's function was not just to introduce the comedy world to the Nazi world, but to let one legitimize the other. And it was at this time that McInnes was wildly successful, his influence long outstanding his unknown tenure in the New York comedy scene. In 2017, Dave Smith used a Gavin McInnes guest hosting spot to interview Richard Spencer and then Christopher Cantwell, and giving them both a friendly platform to lay out their vision for a white ethno-state. So, just make note of these, because... Pretty important. Today, Legion of Skanks holds considerable sway in comedy. With a massive platform, it's lent to anyone who's in the New York club scene, while remaining true to its far-right roots. In 2019, it hosted Emilio Yiannopoulos, and after his fall from grace. In 2018, Gomez angrily chased a fan out from recording when the man pointed out a Proud Boy in the audience. Smith, a Nazi sympathizer who believes that Jews run forces that are killing society, has become a powerful voice in the right flank of the Libertarian Party. He used his own podcast on the Gas Digital to pal around with white supremacists like Cantwell, Spencer, and Nick Fuentes. If I can use the government to do horrific things to the left, I will, because they've been doing horrific things to us for centuries. Cantwell told him after the Unite the Right rally in 2017. Smith agreed. It's almost like you're having a conversation with somebody and they punch you in the face. The only logical response is to get up and fight. Would extremism have found such a loving home in comedy without McInnes? Maybe. Much of the blame also goes to the man who gave him a platform during the alt-right's formative years, Anthony Cumia, a racist Trump supporter who pleaded guilty to domestic abuse charges in 2016. Cumia certainly shares much of McInnes' ideology. He spent 6 years in mingling with reactionaries like Ann Coulter, Alex Jones, and Donald Trump Jr. on Compound Media's marquee program, The Anthony Cumia Show with Dave Landau. The network as a whole straddles the same world as that. On one side, it's a breeding ground for the far-right ideology. On another, it's a regular old gig for pretty much every comic in New York City. What I'm gathering from all this is this cross-pollination that's happening between all these different factions, and it often gets called out that this person may be alt-right adjacent. They may be white supremacist adjacent. They may dabble into some things we call race realism, trying to justify their racism with examples of, well, it happens to be a cultural thing, or they might bring up the bell curve and say it has something to do with IQ. You know, they might say that they're actually feminists when they're actually TERFs. They might bring in the idea that, well, I just don't want, you know, biological women to compete with women in sports, and that's why I feel this way, and that's why I have to write articles about this, and I'm really standing up for women. I'm a feminist for the first time ever, even though I've been saying some of the most fucking horrifying misogynistic shit in my entire life. But this moment in time, I'm now a feminist. I'm here to fight the good fight. It all overlaps. I don't think you necessarily have to be an outright white supremacist who wants an ethno-state to be palling around with these people, to be adjacent to them. But you are helping the cross-pollination of this pipeline. There's no question about that. Each one of these people, as we go further down the rabbit hole, eventually it connects itself all the way to the mainstream. I mean, Gavin McInnes was on the Joe Rogan podcast, lest we forget. And on that Joe Rogan podcast, Joe Rogan was normalizing some of the most fucked up shit he says. So it does have consequences, whether it's starting out in these comedy scenes and then ballooning itself into the real world. Like, the shit is scary as fuck. Just skipping ahead to the end. Something happened a few days later before I published the story. I discerned from my mentions that a user on Onoforums had doxed me in retaliation for my reporting on Cumia. They didn't stop with me. Over a period of weeks, the user Space Edge doxed my entire family, harassed me, my parents, and my brother by text and phone, doxed and harassed several of my Twitter followers, and doxed the man they believe to be my landlord. I'm using the singular they to refer to Space Edge both because I don't know their gender and I cannot know whether the onslaught of text and call originated from one person or several. As I poured over the forum trying to understand what was going on, I discovered that this was a routine pastime for its members, using tactics honed by the right-wing extremists during the Gamergate movement, an online harassment campaign fueled in part by reactionary ideology. You know what's really scary about this? I gotta be honest. The times when I've gone after the far right or people who happen to be race realists and their communities, even people who are individuals I've debated and have very large YouTube followings of that nature, these same tactics are deployed. You will find them combing through all of your social media, trying to pick up information about you, trying to publish information about you, trying to basically silence you through some very aggressive tactics. Like, this is their playbook. TJ Miller, the comedian who has been thoroughly disgraced by allegations of sexual assault and transphobia but is somehow still at it, recently made an apt observation about how power works in mass culture. Stand-ups understand this. If you empower your audience, they're much more likely to pay you again to support you, he told comedian Bobby Lee. The audience wants to be empowered. He's critiquing Hollywood's resistance on stale film franchises he believes audiences don't like, but the analysis applies to comedy too. You empower an audience by giving them what they want. The power they give you in return is their trust, their loyalty, their willingness to fight for you. The relationship between the entertainer and his audience isn't all that different between a political leader and his movement. Well, I feel like nothing's been exposed here whatsoever, especially not about myself or this program in particular. So, yeah. Welcome everybody. Definitely not meta at all. Definitely not a forced feedback loop that I may have been unknowingly participating in, and suddenly I'm like, I gotta galvanize all of you. Like, I have to galvanize you pretties, and that way you can go off into the world and do good leftist praxis. Maybe that's what they've been saying all along. My word, what's happening? Donald Trump is out of office. Gavin McInnes officially left the Proud Boys years ago. Toxic cis white male fat deleted his username a few weeks ago. His posts remain, albeit attributed to guest, announcing his new alias Don Sterling in a private channel. The far right is splintered into factions with varying ideologies and goals, each preparing for a new era of post-Trump violence. The people who gave this movement a constituency in comedy, who masked it in the language of free speech, who hid behind the shield of more respectable artists, are still in the charge of their fiefdoms. They're not going anywhere soon. Oh, sorry, fiefdoms, even better. But still, allow me to add that gravitas to the very end of it. They're not going anywhere anytime soon. If you want us to advertise your channel or work, please go to weareserfs.com and email us a 20 to 30 second ad, and we'll take it on to the end of one of our videos to help promote your leftist channel or progressive something. Whatever you do.
To our gods, I'm Raph, Xander Corvus, Schlatsky. We look to the stars for your divine guidance. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are merely puppets for your amusement. To our lords, Trevor R., Alexander Thaler, Hans Josephine, Ryan Lubin, Timothy K. Meeblebeeps Jr., Bisexual Black Gamer, and Tofox, we shall carry your banner into the fog of war. To our Knights of the Round Table, Josh Mickelson, Zach Christensen, Todd Buckingham, Todd Lajeunesse, Political Puppy, Jimmy Bignuts, Andreas Chiringuito, Yoppie, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Thomas Barrington, J. Fraser Cartwright, Goofalankius, Melissa Murphy, Nicholas Marks, Radical Maniac, The Great Pudini, Kale Kotka, Anthropophagic, Serene 42, Chronic de Hemphog, Phone Jenny, Incosin, Constance Joyce Lacheris, and Ramon Acosta. We drink with you and we salute you.